My wife and I were born and raised in the same small town. I was a few years older than her, so we didn't interact until both of us were finished with college and had moved back. She had just come back after finishing school. The two of us bumped into each other in the grocery store and struck up a conversation. I knew of her because it was a small town, but I didn't know her personally. She had the same experience with me. After checking out, we talked by our cars, exchanged numbers, and went about our day. From the beginning, we seemed like a good match. We both wanted to live in the town we were born in and eventually raise a family there. The two of us also worked in the medical sector, so this was another similarity we shared. It was slow going at first because neither of us was sure it was going to work, but as time passed, it became clear that our relationship was becoming serious. I always knew that I wanted a wife, kids, a house, and the whole 9 yards. She seemed to want the same, so when I proposed, it wasn't much of a surprise. The whole town seemed to be celebrating with us. As I mentioned, it was a small town. Both our families were well known and had a lot of friends here. I suppose that was why I was so insistent on coming back to eventually live here. It was a great place to live and raise a family. Once we got married, the two of us decided to rent an apartment while we saved money for a down payment on a house. Both our parents were more than willing to help us, but for now, we just wanted to see how much we could save. I might seem straightforward and practical, but I loved my wife very much. I had never connected with someone like I did with her, and I assumed she felt the same. For the first 2.5 years of marriage, things were going great. However, around this time, I noticed my wife getting rather short with me. She would snap at me about things that normally didn't bother her before, and it was a little startling. I thought she might have been dealing with some issues at work, so I gave her some time. After 6 months, her attitude started to change. My wife seemed happy and giddy again, but then something else started to come up. She was always busy. When we did interact, things were fine, but this seemed to happen less and less. At the time, I was just glad she was no longer snapping at me. But there was this little voice in my head telling me something was off. I just want to tell you that you need to listen to it because it is usually not wrong. A part of me wanted to ask outright if she was cheating on me, but I didn't know how that would go without any evidence. So when my wife told me she was going out with friends, I showed up at that friend's house. They were surprised to see me and instantly looked guilty. It didn't take long to get them to tell me what was going on, so I went home and waited for my wife to come home to confront her about her infidelity. The first thing she seemed most upset about when I confronted her was that her friend had broken her confidence. The guy she was cheating on me with was her high school boyfriend who also lived in town and was married. At the time, she was treating me terribly. She learned he was taken, which was crazy to me. My wife was married to me. I would think that would have played some factor in her decision-making, but it didn't. When she started treating me nicer, or what I perceived as nicer, she and the AP started up a relationship. I was in shock for a while, unsure of what to say or do. Eventually, I asked her why she did this. My wife gave me some explanation about her high school boyfriend being her one true love. She didn't think they stood a chance of getting back together because he lived across the country. However, just before he got married, he moved back to the town with his wife, and she thought that was her chance. I asked what about me, and she just cried. The tears would have moved me at one point, but no longer. My only response to her was that she would get the divorce she wanted so she could be with her high school boyfriend and precious true love. We had a month-to-month lease on the apartment, so it wouldn't be that hard to get out of it. She told me I could keep the apartment if I wanted, and she'd go live with her AP. I wanted to mention that the AP was married, but I didn't care anymore. My soon-to-be ex-wife was no longer my problem, frankly. To my surprise, she did end up living with the AP. His wife had left town to go back to be with her parents, leaving his house with an empty spot just for my wife. It was almost romantic if you didn't realize that both of them had ended their marriages to be together. Once they moved in together and the divorce process started, rumors started to fly through town. Eventually, People came up to me, apologizing for what happened and telling me they were sorry for how everything went down. I was embarrassed at first for the town to know what happened, but then I realized how my ex was being treated. She and her AP were essentially being treated like the town pariahs. No one wanted anything to do with them. What they had done was unforgivable in their eyes. It got so bad that the AP sold the house, took my ex with him, and left one night. I wasn't upset because I was glad that I would no longer have to see her around town, and it seemed like the town itself had sent her running with her tail between her legs. Anytime my ex came back to visit family, which was a couple of times a year, mind you, the town shunned her. When she brought the AP with her, it was even worse. I eventually moved on and met another woman. She was someone who had been in my class. Like me, she was also dealing with a divorce because of her husband having an affair. It's not to say the two of us bonded over this, but it was something we could relate to about each other. Now the two of us are married and expecting our first child. We have our own house in the same small town we were born and raised in, which is exactly what I always wanted. It turns out I just wanted it with the wrong woman at first. My ex-wife, as far as I know, is still with the AP, but I have heard rumors of the two of them. Of the two of them fighting in public anytime they visited town, it was fitting to know that they hadn't been able to run off into the sunset like they initially wanted. I am just not going to dwell on them and will focus on the new life I am building with my second wife, Opie. To hear that the actual town sent her and the AP running, it means there is some justice for what you went through. Small towns can be great, but they also have their downsides. However, one important thing about them is that they never forget. This is a great way for your ex-wife to learn that she will never be able to run from the huge mistake she made. At the very least, you can forgive and move on. It is a shame that both you and your new wife had to go through such a terrible experience, but ultimately brought the two of you together. Keep focusing on your new wife, child, and future. The three of you are going to build a life together. It's best to fully forget about your ex-wife and the AP. The town will keep them in check whenever they decide to visit. Now let's get into our next story for today. I, a 30-year-old male, got married to my wife, 32-year-old female, when we were in our mid-20s. We had been in similar circles, so it wasn't like we didn't know each other. It wasn't until we were in a group setting that we got to talking. My best friend Greg was throwing a birthday party, and we were both in attendance. After being greeted by Greg, I went to the snack table and bumped into Laura, my future wife, who had the same idea. We had talked before, but never had a chance to have a deeper conversation. That night at the party, we talked for a long time and ended up exclusively speaking with each other. We also spoke with Greg, but once we started talking, we couldn't stop. I ended up grabbing a cup of coffee with her, and we stayed at the cafe until it was late. From there, we started dating. It was slow at first because we were both focused on our careers. I was a chef and Laura worked in the legal sector. After a year of dating, we had a mutual conversation about our future and decided to get married. In 6 months, we had a small wedding with family and friends. Greg was my best man because I couldn't imagine anyone else in that role. Despite our differences, we had been best friends since childhood, and I felt like I could ground him. Once we were married, we got an apartment and started building a life together. The first year was filled with newlywed bliss. During the second year, we began to move away from that and shift towards a more general mindset about marriage. Things were not perfect, but they were good. If we encountered any issues, we worked them out together. After our second anniversary, Greg found himself in a tough situation. He and his girlfriend at the time broke up, leaving him without a place to stay. Being a good friend, I asked Laura if Greg could stay with us. She agreed, and we had an extra room for him while he saved up for a studio apartment. It shouldn't have taken long since he had a decent-paying job in the financial sector. I never thought it was a bad idea for Greg to move in. He needed a place to stay, and I was happy to help. However, what was supposed to be temporary turned into a couple of months. I didn't want to say anything because it was clear that Greg needed time to get his life back on track. Laura also didn't seem to mind having him around. They were getting along quite well. But at some point, I started to feel like their relationship was becoming a little too friendly. One time I even found them cuddling on the couch. They tried to pass it off as one of them just falling asleep on the other, but I didn't believe them. I may have been many things, but a fool was not one of them. So I decided to buy a nanny cam and set it up in the living room for when I wasn't home. The first chance I got, I checked the footage and was shocked by what I saw. Laura and Greg were engaged in a romantic relationship right under my nose, in my own house. I couldn't believe that they would do this to me. Not only was Laura my wife, but Greg was someone I had known since childhood. How could they both betray me like this? The next day, I confronted them both. When they tried to deny it, I showed them the video footage of them kissing on the couch. They then admitted that it had happened and that they didn't mean to hurt anyone, especially me. I asked if they loved each other, but their lack of an answer was enough for me to know the truth. They had feelings for each other, and if that was the case, then so be it. Who was I to stand in the way of true love? After learning the truth, I decided to move out to my parents' house. I then took to social media to publicly call out Laura and Greg. The fallout was immediate. My in-laws turned against Laura, and even Greg's family shamed him. Our mutual friends took sides, with most of them choosing mine, which showed that they were better friends to me than Greg could ever be. Naturally, my own family stood by my side and supported me from the beginning. The next few months were a whirlwind. I had to find a new place to live, go through with the divorce, and move on. Greg and Laura stayed in the apartment for a while, but Greg failed to pay his half of the rent. Eventually they were evicted. Since they had been shunned by their families and friends, it was difficult for them to find any support. The two of them ended up getting evicted, and from there they scrambled to find a place to live. It shouldn't be surprising that the two of them ended up breaking up sometime after this. I didn't care, because neither of them were very important people in my life anymore. One of the worst things about this was losing not only my wife but also my best friend. It seemed fitting that the two were also losing others in their life because of their actions. There wasn't one part of me that regretted blasting the truth of what they did all over Facebook. Let them feel a little of what I felt. I had never been a person who was big on revenge, but when it came down to it, I felt like I had to do it for the healing process. Would I do it again? Yes, I would, because it helped me take another step towards being able to move on. At this point in my life, I am dating again. My current girlfriend and I have been together for a few months. I can't say I have any idea where it's gonna go, but I am hopeful that it is gonna turn into something long-term. All I know is that I'm going to take it slow. This is also something my girlfriend is fine with. Thankfully, it helps a lot that she supports me in this. My ex-wife and ex-best friend are no longer people I think about. Their lives haven't been easy since they decided to have an affair, but that is what they get. I can safely say that I am living my best life right now and will continue to do so now that I have those two toxic people out of my life. OP, this sounds like something you would see on a Jerry Springer episode. Your wife cheating with your best friend is just a huge blow to your trust, ego, and everything. It's crazy that they thought they could get away with cheating in the place where we all live together. A best friend is supposed to have your back and not sleep with your spouse. However, this doesn't mean your spouse is off the hook either. They are supposed to remain faithful to you. Cheating on you with your best friend, of all people, is just not right. I'm glad that you don't regret posting on social media about what they have done. They probably feel embarrassed that their bad deeds are out there for everyone to see, but the thing is, they should feel this way. If they didn't want to feel shame and embarrassment, then they never should have engaged in that behavior in the first place. When I read that you had begun to move on, I breathed a sigh of relief. I am glad that you have begun to move past your anger and try to see if there are other fish in the sea. Even if this current relationship doesn't work out, at least you can say that you have begun to try to see who else is out there for you.